frank, the Leafs have a little salary cap flexibility if Jake Muzzin expect to be an LTIR for the rest of the season. We did get to see him at morning skate today, though, watching in person. How active do you think they'll be in replacing him?
I think they'll be pretty active. I think you've seen Kyle Dubas slow play it to this point, saying, hey, we're going to give plenty of opportunity to Rasmus Sandin and Timothy Liljegren. And that makes sense, of course. But I think longer term, it's interesting because a lot of people, I've gotten this reaction on social media saying this team doesn't even need a defenseman right now. They like what they've seen from Jordy Ben. They've got, volume and some numbers there that they could play with in terms of guys that might be able to sub in. But I think I've always viewed, and more importantly, other managers around the league view this Leafs team for the last few years as being a piece away on defense. Now you take out a guy like Muzzin, who was brought in to be part of that championship run, that championship pedigree that he has. And I wrote a story earlier this week on dailyfaceoff.com that looks at 6 potential fits for the Maple Leafs on their back end. And I want to point this out because I think it's important to look at the ideal scenario for Toronto. I think ideally the Leafs would not like to trade for a rental. That's sort of been in Kyle Dubas's MO. And I think after going through what they did with Nick Foligno, they don't want to trade for a rental ideally. But take a look at this list. They might have to because the defense market is really thin. We heard Sens GM Pierre Dorian say earlier this week at the GM meetings saying, hey, look, we were in a spot where it's really hard to trade for defense in this league. But out of the 6 guys on the list, 5 of them are pending unrestricted free agents. The only guy that has term on his deal is Matt Roy from the Los Angeles Kings. And when you take a look at the 6 guys, we'll get it up here eventually. You can also go to dailyfaceoff.com to read it. That the guy that stands out for me the most, Steven, is John Klingberg. I think the Leafs have an opportunity here to jump the market, get someone from Anaheim where the Ducks have already struggled. Clearly was brought in with the idea that if they struggled, he might be a potential flippable asset. He does have the no trade clause until January 1. I think that's one really key name to watch as the best all-around, well-rounded fit for Toronto that can help on your power play, can help and is above average defensively, and skates incredibly well as well and can chew up a ton of minutes.
Senators GM Pierre Dorian said this week that he's very active on the trade front. He also mentioned he might have the solution internally. Does he?
I think he might. When you look at the Ottawa Senators and their spot and the contributions that they've gotten from Jake Sanderson, already he highlighted playing 25 minutes a night. And Eric Brandstrom has really taken his game up a notch this season. And then you look at Jacob Bernard-Docker slide in. That we've all been kind of pointing to this moment, and I know you'd have eyes on that as our prospect analyst, Steven, about the Sens have a ton of talent in their pipeline. And the reason I wanted to highlight that as a potential option is that I think a lot of teams get in trouble potentially chasing a fit that might not be there given how thin the defense market is. And I wanted to compare that to the notion that the Buffalo Sabres, an approach that they've taken, because they made a very clear choice this summer, almost the exact opposite summer as the Ottawa Senators, where, we were talking about all the different guys that they had added to beef up their team. The Sabres made a really clear point to say, we are not signing anyone that's going to take away opportunity or minutes from our young players. We want to continue to progress with them and see their games grow. And yeah, the Sabres have hit a major bump in the road right now. But I think for the longer term and understanding exactly what you have and not blocking those paths that we've been waiting for the Sens for a long time, I think that's a critically important point to think about moving forward.
There was a lot of talk this week about the Sharks potentially listening on Erik Karlsson, who's having a fantastic season. I don't think we expected it to be this good. But is there another player you have an eye on in San Jose?
Yeah, it's interesting that there was so much buzz around Karlsson. I think probably because he's off to such a hot start that people are asking Mike Grier, like, hey, would you listen? And I was standing there for the conversation with Mike Grier, and of course the Sharks would listen. He's not slamming his phone down if anyone's calling about Erik Karlsson or any other player on his roster, given the contract constraints that he has, given that so many of these guys are signed for long term. The Karlsson thing is interesting, but let's park that for a bit. For me, it really is Timo Meier that's most interesting from this group. And part of it is because They were in a spot last year with Tomas Hertl where he was a pending UFA and they knuckled down and signed him to a major long-term extension, 64, $65 million. And that was a ton to, keep a team together and a player part of that team that hasn't had any success in recent years. Now, Timo Meier is in a different spot because he's a pending restricted free agent, but he has a massive qualifying offer at $10 million due. And so I think there's no doubt that teams will be calling on Meier. I think there's a very small chance that the San Jose Sharks end up keeping him beyond this season because of both the contract and because of the spot that they're in one of the few tradable pieces and assets that they have to potentially get something in return. But the question for me, Steven, is what can they get in return? I think you have to take a notch below the Alex DeBrincat deal that the Chicago Blackhawks got this past summer. And the reason for that is not only was DeBrincat's qualifying offer less, but you had one more season of DeBrincat on a somewhat reasonable deal. Whereas already right from Jump Street, you're getting Timo Meier as a rental. And the teams that you're probably dealing with are in contender mode to try and get someone like Timo Meier for the playoffs. So the Blackhawks are able to get a first, second, and third, but you see seventh overall is pretty high up in the draft. You're probably dealing with teams that are way later in the first round, actually probably closer to the second round pick that they got from the Sens, which was 39th overall, than you are to the top. And so then you factor in what happens next. Maybe someone treats him as a pure rental, but then the prices are probably even lower than that. So I think the Sharks, it's an early warning shot that they're probably in a really tough spot trying to deal Timo Meier as we get closer to the March 3rd trade deadline.
Maybe not the greatest thing to be in, and you're that bad and you can't really trade away some of your key pieces. Thank you, Frank. Today's Icebreakers has been delivered by DoorDash. Use the promo code there at the bottom of your screen. GameDay25 gets you 25% off and free delivery on your first order of $15 or more. All your favorites and more delivered right to your door by DoorDash.